parents will say to me, I feel so bad because I'm the only one that's made this decision. And I'm like, good, stand in your conviction. Sometimes as a parent, you are going to make decisions that your children are going to hate. Stand in your conviction of why, and know that they're going to thank you years later.
Yes.
But parents are wanting this immediate gratification. Am I doing good? Is it okay?
Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of the Terry Cole Show. This is a very special episode. I am actually in a conversation with the super nanny herself, Jo Frost. So Jo is a global parenting expert and universally recognized TV household personality. I mean, I think she started in 1987, maybe. So I've known of her for many, many years, but I started following her on Instagram and really love her Instagram feed and what she talks about. So if you're not following her, you want to be. She's also a New York Times bestselling author, global thought leader in the parenting arena. She is an in-demand speaker, a consultant, as well as go-to expert for media outlets, literally around the world. So we talked about all the things from parents sort of coming out of the pandemic to boundaries to should kids have cell phones at school to all the things. So I really hope that you enjoy this very spirited conversation with Jo Frost as much as I enjoyed having it with her. I'm super psyched to welcome Jo Frost to the Terry Cole Show. Hi, welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
We're doing it. We were just talking off air about how sometimes you meet people in the interwebs and you just feel like you've already known them. That is how I feel about you. That is how you feel about me.
Yeah, I think so. It's interesting, the space of Instagram, different social media platforms, because there are those like us that will read their energy and read in between the lines and sometimes see something that's completely contradictory to what's being posted out there. And then the real, mass of the fact that people want to put a certain perception out there, an optic of what's going on in their life. And it is the boundary crossover of life. And then for some that are using that for businesses as well. And it's an interesting space. And I like to sit back. I like to watch. I like to observe. I like to teach that with parents. I think you learn 60%, 70% of just sitting back and watching. It is still being involved, but it is parental presence, being there, learning to say less, and actually just watching and observing. You attune, you learn so much about human behavior, how somebody reacts or responds. You can read the same behavior patterns on Instagram.
I have to say, though, I really love your Instagram feed. Really gets me to think. Like, I appreciate your thoughtfulness and what you're putting out there, and how a lot of times what you're really doing is curating real conversations in the comments section of your posts. You posted something recently about being supportive of not having kids having phones at school during the school day. I completely agree with that and support that. You will always have, of course, contrarians saying, thinking that you're saying the extreme, like we're burning all phones and, what if there's an emergency? And you're like, dude, we went to school too. When there is an emergency, there are things called phones, like landlines that people can use in the office. Like we all survived not having that instant attachment. But what I think is interesting about that post that you put up, and there was such a civil exchange of ideas, and there was lots, it was over 300 comments. It was like people were really had lots of feelings about it. But this is what I think can be such a beautiful space that Instagram can be if you're curating it. But I think also, Jo, though, I honestly think you have good boundaries, because you're letting people in your sphere know that there's an expectation that people will be like respectful and normal in the comments, and they kind of are on your feed.
That is my hope. that is my hope. And I noticed that behavior and I wanted to mention it because I did add to the post in saying this was such a pleasant, civil conversation where we were able to come together and talk about uncomfortable truths. And I think we have to, in society, talk about subjects that are uncomfortable. We have to normalize those in order for them to become normal in society so that we can overcome. And again, that's the power. That's the power of media if it's used in a way that allows everybody to contribute in a way of helping. Otherwise, to me, what's the point? What's the point?
Totally agree. So then let me ask you, because you're really on the pulse of parenting stuff and you have been for decades. So coming out of the pandemic, what do you see is stuff that parents are struggling with, or parents are doing well, or parents are asking you questions about?
They're burnt out. They're exhausted. We have a recession. We have a climate where there is not affordable housing. Rents are going up, inflation, affordable childcare, work opportunity. I mean, a whole gamut of circumstances that have a major impact, and the ripple effect hits the kids. The kids are the silent witnesses of so much that's going on in the parental household, and how parents they're treading water, and some have their heads underneath and they're bopping up to try and gasp air. And we've had 4 years of that. I mean, as well as a huge number of us that were helping parents through the pandemic, or just those without kids as well, in how they were going to adapt and rationalize the fears that they had, certainly to get through one day past the next. And I was talking to a lot of therapists, and we were all feeling quite, we were all feeling like, guns a-ho, we're there supporting the doctors, the nurses, we're the kind of third line, at the back doing the work quietly, and going, God, how are we going to get through all these numbers, of families that are coming through, because the emails were after one, after another. We're a bit tired. Everyone's feeling it. It's a tough time when you feel and you support and you want to continue to hold your own family up and be a good neighbor and friend for so many. And it's like, how do you honor the fact that you also have to preserve yourself? I don't know about you, but I get to an age sometimes and I go, I don't really know how much I do know. Meaning you're still the pupil as you are the teacher as well in life,
I do think that, Jo, I think that's so true about the more you know, or the more you learn. It's almost like maybe the more comfortable we become in not knowing and questioning and being like, okay, now I'm in inquiry mode. How can I do this better? I think that at least what I've heard from my therapy clients, sort of post-pandemic, especially those with kids and those who are teaching at home and doing all the things that they were doing, is that boundaries was such an issue. Like I put out a lot of stuff during the pandemic of like, how can we figure out boundaries in the home if we're suddenly all home all the time when we didn't used to be?
Terry, boundaries is like I would say the number one. There are the nuances of parenting, sleep and eating and behavior, but boundaries as a principle, boundaries as a pillar, boundaries as foundation. No relationship can exist healthy. No dynamic can exist with respect and love without boundaries. And in the pandemic, certainly it was, families at home, kids were learning at home with all the emotions that were happening. One needed space. Teenagers wanted their own space, but then the crying 3-year-olds and the one that needed how do we create our own bubbles within our own sanctuary? How do we create that space so that I can give myself permission to just take a minute to breathe, reset before I carry on for the rest of the afternoon? And, like I say to any mother or to any parent, raising children, you kind of don't dock out and say, right, I'm going to go off to Starbucks. I'll grab a panini and a coffee. I'll take my lunch break. You have your lunch break on the job. You have your lunch break while you're with the kids and doing what you're doing, with the family. And so boundaries were absolutely vital in the way of like just trying to keep your sanity, over the pandemic. But I do think they're vital, period, in any relationship and in any family dynamic. So it will be within my teachings to talk about the importance of boundaries and upholding boundaries and understanding where they've been violated, where they've been crossed, and an education of understanding that, because those that were not raised or with a lot of boundaries or enmeshment or codependency really innocently do not know any different, and then wonder why they feel resentment or wonder why they've been feeling so angry inside and couldn't really articulate that. And so my job is to be able to bring them to a space of vocalizing, what's been happening, using their voice and feeling empowered to talk about that, and for the rest to hear, because it certainly isn't a case of, well, you should know. It's certainly not that.
And we don't. And what do you think about the unique struggles with blended families? Because I know that you hear from people in blended families all the time, I imagine. Yes. What are their struggles?
For the blended family, it's really about how they will communicate with one another and work together in honoring each other's children's, and how they come together with the sort of rules that they want to upkeep within the family home, understanding what's age appropriate for the different levels and ages of children, and the communication with parents being able to talk about how they do that together. So one of the biggest things that I see within the family dynamic is the single mother that may meet a partner that she's been dating for a while before she wants to introduce the partner to the child, and then that partner may have children, and she still remains quite protective of the child and doesn't want to let the partner in with the responsibilities and the raising of all children. And so she feels sort of very in her right to be able to sort of uphold her boundaries and lay down rules with all the children, but still very protective of her own cub, as you will, from the lion in the home, right? And so again, it's about untangling really those limited self-beliefs, what maybe the mother's protecting the child from or herself, the fear behind that. So again, they can have healthier boundaries in the way that they communicate about their values.
There's cohesion too. Like when you have family values, where you have like what are our family agreements, let's say? I used to have this when, in my situation, I married a widower who had 3 teenage sons. And it's like coming in and really, I was a psychotherapist already, but, that doesn't necessarily help you when you're in the situation where you're like, oh my God. But again, coming together and being like, this is how it's going to be, like asking questions and having agreements, even if it was just stuff like, it was a bunch of guys living together and then me. And I was like, they would be like, shut up. Not to me, of course, but they to each other, definitely not to me. But I would always say, hey, like, not here. The world is hard enough. Let's not be hard inside here. Like, let this be a soft place for all of us to sort of land. And in the beginning, they were sort of like, oh, she's corny. But I feel like because I was patient, I got through, because I didn't need them to regard me in any particular way. But it would have been a very different situation if Vic was, as you were describing, super protective, and if he was sort of like, no, like, I don't want you involved. I honestly don't think it would have worked for me, because I needed to be a part of it in a real way, even though it was hard. And even though the conversations were hard and family therapy was hard and all this stuff was hard, but it was worth it. Right. And I couldn't have just been a of someone looking on the
Well,
sidelines myself.
you couldn't have. I mean, you personally couldn't have, because
Mm-mm.
it's your work. It's what you do. It's what you know. It's what you're educated, in knowing, right? And you teach this to others that don't. And so you mentioned patience, and I think that's really important. And having the tolerance to understand where somebody's at, and being able to
Mm-hmm.
hold that space for them, knowing that it's not personal. A lot of
Yep.
families will take it personal. It's a direct dig, and then become very defensive. And then you've got two defenses, and you've got the ego laughing in the middle, and there's no room for ego. But we know that's the insecurity, that's the fear, that's the protection. So, it requires a willingness to want to get through it, a
Yep.
willingness for both parties to want to be in a different place. And that, some people are committed to being right. Some people are committed to being right, no matter what
Yep.
the cost. So, for those families, I would say that it's
Mm-hmm.
really important to, I mean, look, I give your book, it's great. When your book came out,
Oh,
it was
thanks.
fantastic. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. So I'll be able to give these to my clients and say, look, this is a pillar. You need to read this, and we'll shave so much time that we will
Yeah.
take in therapy, because this book is a great staple. So your book has become, thank you, it's become a great staple for me to give to my clients, so that they understand really the foundations, the principles of what you're talking about, So thank you.
Thank you for telling people to buy my book. I appreciate it. Joe, I know that you work with families with anaphylaxis. Like, this is just
Yes.
before we're getting on. So can we talk a little bit about that? What sort of brought you to that, and how do you work with them?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for bringing that up. Well, I do have anaphylaxis. I'm allergic to all nuts and shellfish. So I grew up with this medical condition, and
Mm.
I was very fortunate enough to have parents that raised me with no limitations, not making me feel like it would limit me in my life. So I've never felt like it's defined who I am or what I want to
Hmm.
accomplish or do in my
Right.
life. However, I was educated very young. And so my parents taught me the importance of understanding what this medical condition was. And I actually
Hmm.
remember helping a family on one of my shows, and I actually got rather tearful about it, because I was, in the moment talking about it and realizing, wow, like, what a gift I was given by my parents to actually
Yeah.
educate me so young, and to give me these opportunities in life where I would be unapologetic about what my medical
Hmm.
condition was, and to be
Hmm.
very diligent. And in doing so, when you do have a medical condition like that, it does make you very hyper vigilant.
Yeah.
You are reading between the lines in the way that somebody says something, whether their body language aligns with it. It's been very important for me to champion the allergy and anaphylaxis community worldwide, in making sure that more understand the awareness, the education, and then the empathy based on that education to change policies and to change laws. And I think I'm a very small voice in comparison to many who are doing real, everlasting, very committed, deep work day in and day out. But I do like to use my platform and my shows to be able to help those families who really don't feel seen or heard or validated in the way
Right.
that they truly do need to be, because, as we know, it's a life-threatening medical condition. And unfortunately, where there has been a lack of education and diligence and training, we see time and time again, unfortunately, that those that have the fatalities, they've passed away. And it's all
That's
it's
horrible.
really horrible. It really is. So yes, I like to be able to talk about it when I have the opportunity, and to be able to give advice to families, so that they can feel more empowered, and the children can use their voice and feel less fear, but at the same
Right.
time less anxiety, or to understand the anxiety around those circumstances and what
Right.
they can do to change it. Why do we not have school nurses having permission across the United States to have EpiPens available?
Yep.
Why don't we have them available in public buildings and spaces? You know, training of staff, those in childcare as well, and nursery facilities.
Yeah, I mean, this is important stuff, but I think that it's really great that you're able to use your platform to sort of give a voice to those who don't have it, and also you're normalizing and legitimizing the family's right to protect their kid or protect themselves if it's them, right?
Absolutely, there needs to be just more education and more understanding, and we need more champions, you know, those who don't have it to champion for us as well, in recognizing that it takes great leadership. It really is about great leadership in providing a service for the people who have these medical conditions. That means training at daycare centers and nurseries, you know, which we know Thomas Sylvia does at the Elijah Foundation. It means, you know, making sure that those who own restaurants, you know, chefs and training and waiters and waitresses and, you know, serving staff are trained in understanding this. But across the board, just policies in general, airlines, travel, hotels, you know, public spaces. For any family that are in these circumstances, it might as well be a loaded gun. You're playing Russian roulette. I do not want to be in a situation where I'm being told, well, you've got your EpiPen, so it'll be fine. No, an EpiPen is what I take immediately that buys me time to get to a hospital.
To not die.
But it's not guaranteed. You know, we hope, you know, and I'm still here, touch wood, which, you know, I have had encounters. However, for some, it's been fatal, you know.
Exactly. Let me ask you your thoughts on, this is something that's come up and been so much in the media, is kids or teenagers or, you know, tweens and social media. What are your thoughts on what's happening out there right now?
God, there's so much. What are we seeing with kids and families? Well, first and foremost, I have to say, I am discouraged. I find it deplorable that we have come to a place where parents are filming children and writing scripts for them to behave a certain way and then filming that. Whether it's cracking eggs, slapping food on children's faces, setting them up to display the natural behavior that any child would, and then filming that. I find that very distasteful, for likes, for views, for attention. I'd rather see a mother film a situation and just go, I really need help. You know, could somebody give me advice? I'd like to see more protection. I don't think we have enough laws from those that own the platforms that protect children and parents with children with what they're viewing, what they're seeing. We know the importance because of predators online and safety measures that parents need to take heed to. It's so easy for children to be manipulated, for predators to be in there, just slide into that DM or into that video game, you know, and to understand exactly what they're looking for. They're looking for exactly what you are giving them. All this free time, all this free unsupervised time, them needing to connect and make friends. So we have the side of parents taking accountability and really being responsible. And again, it's an uncomfortable truth because parents want to feel heard and supported, and they want resource because they're living in a world right now that feels very stringent on resource and help, and they're struggling, you know, and I understand that fully, because things do need a change, not just here, but in the UK as well, with respects to centres and resources and training and funding for staff. And so you understand it from the parent side, but I also want parents to understand the importance of them valuing their own family. And that means having to look at themselves in the mirror and to take accountability for what their responsibility is as a parent. And sometimes that voice triggers a lot of young parents when I talk as such. It triggers a lot of parents.
Yeah. It's interesting though, Joe. I see my, friends of mine who are influencers and who've got lots and lots of followers from Canada. Yeah. I find that Canadian influencer moms do not share information about their children, like across the boards. My friends that I know, and this is not just like one person. This is like 5 people randomly, where they don't even say the names of their kids. They don't. One of my closest friends has been, raising a son who's now 22, but the whole time, if she ever mentioned him, she always put a smiley face over his face. But I know what you're saying about, what is happening, because there's actually was a lawsuit that I read about where a kid was bringing a lawsuit against the parents for exploitation. Have you heard this?
No, I haven't. But we do. I mean, I have heard of parents that have, literally, if you use their children as a means of influence or, influencing for money, and, their children are just constantly on social media as part of like the business, whatever they're promoting or whatever they're doing. And again, it comes down to boundaries. It just comes down to boundaries in recognizing that at the moment, all they see is black and white. All we're seeing is linear, and everything is in the middle. Everything is the gray area, and everything is the middle. Really, we just need to stop for a moment and say, hold on a minute. What's important to us? But again, you talk about the boundaries in social media, and then those wanting the attention and the likes and the validation. It's Pandora's box. And so I think it's impossible to talk about this conversation and just limit it to a few things, because we know that would be doing a disservice, because there are so many puzzle pieces to what can make social media so dangerous, for families and children. But parents do first and foremost have to understand that if there are platforms out there, which we know, that are not regulated in a certain way, you have to protect your children. It's your problem when you've allowed your child to go on any TikTok or social media at the age of 11, when the rules say something else. And even when the rules say something else, is your child emotionally, never mind age, is your child emotionally equipped? Have you sat down and done the homework? Have you spoke to them about forever? Once it's out there, forever, you know? And so there's this kind of out of mind, out of sight, where I believe a lot of young children think it's compartmentalized. I'll go for a job, but they're not going to look on my Instagram and see that I was out partying until 3 a.m. and I was reckless here because it looked all cool. And we look great. And your boss is looking at that.
Who would have been your boss, but who didn't hire you because they looked at your Instagram feed.
Who would have been your boss? I actually heard, I think it was Matthew McConaughey and his wife, and I don't remember who the interview was with, but I thought, he's got it. I hope parents listen to him. He was talking about giving his son a phone and what they did as parents. And I thought, I like that. They were very conscious of exactly the world that they were allowing their child to become a part of by him having that phone. But I think children overall, I think children have phones too young. And there are lots of excuses. Going back to that post, going back to the post that I put out, there were lots of excuses of why children needed the phone. And it goes without saying, that if your child is traveling and they have a phone and you have all the measures there and it's just about communicating, with the parents or the guardian, it can still go in the rucksack and not be switched on. Those responses are like, oh no, it goes straight to fear. And then guess what happens? It's like, we can't live in that space continuously as a victim. We have to say, well, what can we do right now? What changes can we make right now that resonate with us as parents to protect our children, but to still make sure that they can have fun, but that we can make sure ultimately we are doing our job as parents first. We are not their friends. And so sometimes I get emails, Terry, where, you know, parents will say to me, I feel so bad because I'm the only one that's made this decision. And I'm like, good. That's what I sent back. I sent back, good. Stand in your conviction. You understand why. You know why.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important for parents to understand that sometimes as a parent, you are going to make decisions that your children are going to hate. They're going to hate, and they're going to throw the book at you. You're me. You hate me. You don't love me. You never understand me. Stand in your conviction of why, and know that they're going to thank you years later when they can live that life, when they possibly have children,
correct.
or they mature and they realize that parents are wanting this immediate gratification. Am I doing good? Is it okay? The fear that they might lose their child, that the children's not going to love them. And again, that's projection of perhaps maybe their own upbringing, and it triggers. Parenting can also trigger birth and death, can trigger those life experiences, your past, your history with your family.
Especially when if you haven't processed. Like there's so much about parenting that when your kid hits 3 years old, 6 years old, 10 years old, whatever unresolved injuries that you may have suddenly get like super activated, where it's like, oh my God, I forgot about this, but now it's all coming back. I want to say thank you so much for spending time with us today, Jo. It was such a pleasure, exactly as I knew it would be. The best place for people to find you is jofrost.com.
Yes, or the Jo Frost on the platforms. Absolutely.
Okay, so we'll put all of these in the show notes. Thank you. Let's do this again.
Yes, please. I'd love to.